Everybody, and welcome. My name is Ruth Martin. I'm a master's student in animal welfare science, ethics and law, and today I'd like to talk to you about dolphin captivity and particularly ongoing problems in terms of capture, trade, housing and training. So before we go on, just a very quick look at what we're going to cover today. So we'll start off by having a look at some of the studies around dolphin intelligence and their complex needs, really making the argument that because they are so cognitively sophisticated and have such complex natural social alliances, and that have such high space requirements as well, it's pretty much impossible to cater for their needs adequately in captivity. We'll then move on to look at dolphins in entertainment, particularly the global trade and marine parks that take these dolphins, and also the welfare problems in captivity, particularly housing and training. We'll then move on to look at a case study of capture from the wild. This is based around Taiji Bay in Japan, which is the subject of the 2010 Oscar-winning documentary The Cove. So we'll look at some statistics to do with that as well. And finally, we'll have a look at some of the growing awareness and opposition to this, so the work of these groups and also public protests as well that are working to draw public attention to these issues. And finally, we'll conclude by looking at what the current situation is and also what you as the viewer can do as well about this issue. Before we go on, I'd just like to say thank you to these organisations. You can see their logos there on the right hand side. They've been kind enough to allow me to use some of their photographs to illustrate this presentation, so I want to say thanks very much to them. So to begin with then, a very brief look at dolphin intelligence. This is obviously a very rich and complex study area, but I just wanted to draw attention to some of the key things that came out in the course of my own research on this. So the first point to note is that these studies are often longitudinal in nature. They can last anything from 10 up to 30 years, and they're done in this way so that they can gain access to the dolphin communities and actually fully observe the way in which they communicate and the way in which they associate as well in their social groupings. And this can only really be done by gaining the dolphins' trust. So there's evidence then that they obviously have highly developed brains and communication systems. They interact with both within and between species. So Hertzing in 2014 argues that we need to move beyond an anthropocentric notion of intelligence assessment and actually look at ways in which we could assess it separate from comparison to humans. So she argues for a range of criteria such as encephalization quotient, which is to do with brain structure, but also communication complexity, individual complexity, social complexity, and interspecies interaction. So this is really looking at the ways in which they communicate and also problem solving and things like that. Connor and Crutzen in 2015, in their 30-year study of dolphins, found evidence of complex alliances. So they found first-order alliances, which are stable and longer-term groupings of 2 to 3 individuals that cooperate to achieve particular goals like mating, foraging, and hunting. But they also found second-order alliances. So this is where groups of first-order alliances would get together in larger groups to cooperate where needed for actions such as foraging and hunting. There's also evidence for language ability, culture and social learning. So Herman et al. In 1984 found that you could teach dolphins audio and visual languages using sounds and gestures. These were actually recombinable in terms of their meanings and the sentence structures, and dolphins were able to recombine them themselves in novel ways. So this indicates that they understood the syntax and the meanings of the sentences and the particular words within them. This is comparable to small human children in terms of linguistic ability. Hersing in 1996 found evidence of complex contextual sounds indicating things like excitement, cooperation, and also signature whistles, which are thought to perform the same function as human names in signalling particular individuals. Whitehead in 2009 argues that whales and dolphins are amongst the species that exhibit culture, i.e. they have specific behavioural repertoires that are passed down through social learning within particular regional or social groups. And then a quick note then on obviously their complex needs and behaviours. So World Animal Protection's report in 2019 states that dolphins in the wild cover huge distances. Their home ranges could be anything up to 400 square kilometres. And for reference, the average tank size in which captive dolphins are kept is about 200,000 times smaller than this. So you can really see the severe welfare compromises and the inability to live natural lives in captive environments. There's also, as I say, this evidence about their complex social groupings and alliances. This is very unlikely to be replicated in captivity. So again, this draws attention to some of the key ways in which you can't cater for dolphins in captive environments. Moving on then to look at dolphins and entertainment in relation to the global trade. So World Animal Protection's 2019 report, they say this is the first attempt really to bring together a lot of information about the industry side of dolphin captivity, and particularly the value and the main countries in which it's based. So they estimate that it's worth anything from 1.1 to 5.5 billion US dollars to marine parks and dolphinaria worldwide. This is based on a calculation that a single dolphin could bring in revenues anywhere from 400,000 up to 2 million US dollars for the facility in which they're based. So you can really see the clear financial incentives to continue with these practices. We can see here some of the main countries that together are responsible for over 60% of the 3,600 captive dolphins that were identified for this report. It's also worth noting that regions such as the Caribbean and Bermuda were responsible for a further 20%. So we can really see that there's global hotspots in terms of dolphin captivity. 87% of those kept were bottlenose dolphins, and again we'll see that reflected in the statistics of which species are captured and killed at the Taiji hunts as well. It's worth noting that many of the issues that were talked about in this presentation are also generalisable to whales, such as orcas, that are also kept in these captive conditions. Moving on then to look at housing conditions of dolphins in captivity. So as I've already said, it's impossible to cater for dolphins in captivity in any case due to their very complex social groupings and also their enormous space requirements, meaning that you can't really mimic the wild environment in the case of dolphins in captivity. However, even if we put that aside, I really want to underscore some of the ways in which the welfare is very much deprioritised in favour of considerations that make things easier or more profitable for humans. So the tanks are kept very barren and featureless, and the reason for this is so that they're easier to clean as if there's nothing on the walls. But unfortunately, this obviously causes a huge problem in terms of lack of enrichment for the dolphins. There's an issue in terms of chlorinated water. This is done to improve the clarity and also cleanliness of the water so that visitors can see in. Unfortunately, it causes welfare problems because it actually irritates their eyes and causes skin conditions which require veterinary attention. There's insufficient space, not only in terms of the size of enclosures, but also the fact that there's not very many hiding places within them. Again, this would cause problems for visitors that wanted to see the dolphins, so this is deprioritised. There's also an issue in terms of noise pollution. So they may be exposed to things over 100 decibels, which for such a sound sensitive species we can imagine is acutely distressing. They might have music at the shows that they're performing in, or they might be nearby theme parks or roller coasters, and of course there's cheering crowds to consider as well. I'd like to quickly look at some of the training techniques, a very brief history of dolphin training. So this actually began in the 1940s in the US. So they wanted a space for film and TV producers to be able to get underwater footage involving dolphins, but they actually quickly found out how intelligent they were and how trainable they were. So they began this process of operant conditioning, which meant that they could get them to perform tricks, and they then became very popular tourist attractions. Unfortunately, a lot of the training techniques are very inhumane. So one of them is starvation training, where this is a form of operant conditioning of negative reinforcement, where essentially the dolphin is motivated to perform the desired behaviour in order to avoid the negative and aversive state of hunger and starvation. This has clear consequences in terms of welfare, and indeed goes against one of the 5 freedoms that are fundamental to animal welfare, being freedom from hunger and thirst. Moving on then to look at the case study of Taiji Bay in Japan. This was actually the subject of the Oscar-winning documentary The Cove. This practice of dolphin hunting began, they think, in the 1960s. There is an argument that this community is a traditional whaling community and should be able to continue with these practices on that basis. However, that would have involved the whole community coming together with fairly primitive technology and perhaps taking down a single whale, whereas this is really not comparable in terms of its industrial scale, involving hundreds if not thousands of dolphins. So really that's not argued to be a valid case in terms of continuing these practices. Unfortunately, the capture methods are very inhumane. So what they do is they go out up to 200 miles into the open ocean and they lower rods into the water, at which point they hammer on these rods, and this creates a very unpleasant wall of sounds. So the dolphins swim in the other direction, have this aversive reaction. Unfortunately, that's towards the shore. And at that point, then further fishermen are waiting with nets and trapping, and we'll see, this often leads to very violent and inhumane forms of capture and slaughter. Crucially, the International Whaling Committee have said that they will not regulate hunts in relation to small cetaceans. So this really indicates that there may be a lack of sort of international legal coordination to put an end to these practices. So we can see here some figures for captures and kills over time. This is from Rico Barry's Dolphin project that do monitoring work in Taiji. We can see what initially looks like quite a positive change in terms of a reduction of the numbers of dolphins that are being killed and captured over the years. But we do need to interpret this with caution, just because it may be attributable to things like changes in migratory routes, population declines and climate change, as opposed to a response to welfare concerns. We can see here that there's far more kills than captures. The ones that are killed are sold for meat. The value of a meat dolphin may only be a few $100s, whereas the value of a live dolphin that can be sold into captivity could be anything from tens of thousands up to $150,000. So you can see here the clear financial incentive to continue with these practices. We can see here this is a very inhumane method of slaughter. Not only is this likely to be extremely painful and distressing for the individual dolphin that's being slaughtered, but also, given what we know about their sophistication and social complexity, we can imagine that this is acutely distressing for any other dolphins that are in the water as well. So while there is this reduction over time, we do need to view that with some caution for the reasons I've described. A quick look then at the statistics for the last season just gone. This is the 2019-2020 season, so this finished in the beginning of March this year. You can see here some clear breakdowns by species, and these grey areas here are the unfilled quotas that they have. So we can see on the right hand side that there are different numbers for each species, but I wanted to just pick out really that bottlenose dolphins are really not killed at all. They are all captured for captivity, and this reflects the fact that about 87% of the dolphins that are in captivity are bottlenose dolphins. So you can see this clear relationship really in supply and demand in terms of captivity, that the bottlenose dolphins are really being captured for that purpose. So I really wanted to draw attention to this quote from Rick Barry's Dolphin project. This really underscores the message of this presentation, which is that the hunts as they currently exist are very much driven and motivated by the captive dolphin industry and the value that's associated with that. So I'll just give you a moment to read this. I'd like to draw attention now to some of the organisations that are actually fighting back against these practices. So we've got here Rico Barry's Dolphin Project, the Oceanic Preservation Society, which were part of the team that put together the Cove documentary, and also World Animal Protection, who put together that Behind the Smile report, which really sets out a lot of the features of the trade and industry. So in terms of their aims then, they can't really interfere with the hunts and disrupt them. They don't know how effective this would be, but also it would be illegal for them to do that. They'd risk deportation, and also it would jeopardise their relationship with local populations that can sometimes resent their presence. So instead what they're looking to do is to document the abuses and also to raise international awareness of these issues. A little more here then about the organisations that are working to raise awareness and create the public opposition that's needed for this issue. Just to pick out Ocean Preservation Society and the Cove documentary. So the OPS claims that up to 1.3 million people actually contacted the Japanese government about this issue after watching the Cove documentary. And in terms of the World Animal Protection report, they say that this is geared towards travel agents, tour operators, promoters, and so on, in the kind of secondary role in the industry, promoting these things by directing consumers towards them. So really it's to educate them about the welfare consequences of what they are promoting and what they're endorsing, in case they're naive about these things. Important as well to note that the aim of these movements is to abolish captivity of cetaceans in the long run. However, there are welfare issues associated with releasing captive cetaceans as well, so that's not really an option at the moment. So what they're looking for is better welfare for the current kind of generation of captive cetaceans, and for this to be the final generation as well, after which dolphins will no longer be kept in captivity. To conclude then, I really just want to emphasise that this is an ongoing problem. Perhaps in more Western audiences, we might think that this is something that has fallen out of public favour, but really, the way in which the captive dolphin industry is driving these hunts that take place is something that really need to continue to have international pressure. Also like to say some of the ways in which you can help as the viewer. So of course the main thing is to boycott these attractions, to not give money to the marine parks and theme parks that have captive dolphins. Secondly, we can engage in something called citizen science and also responsible tourism as well. So obviously we can interact with wild animals in more responsible and ethical ways by viewing them from a distance in their natural habitats, and this can raise money for conservation, and it may be possible that members of the public could even document things like population levels and report back that data as part of citizen science. Finally, of course, you can donate. I'll put some links to some petitions as well in the description box below. And finally, of course, you can protest about this. So as I say, there are protests that happen outside the Japanese embassy. So there's lots of ways to get involved and make your voice heard on these issues. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this presentation interesting and hopefully inspiring, and giving you some ways in which you can act as a citizen and consumer to oppose this issue, which causes such severe welfare problems for dolphins in captivity. Here's a list of references that I've drawn on to create this presentation. This can also be used as a list for further reading, so I'll put that in the description box below.